He thought destiny would be loud. A car crash, a phone call in the middle of the night, something sharp enough to cut his life cleanly into a before and an after. That's what stories promised. Big moments with big consequences. He was wrong. His destiny arrived in a second so small that everyone else in the room passed through it without feeling a thing. They kept talking, kept lagging, kept checking their phones. Only he felt the invisible line draw itself across time, dividing what his life had been from what it was about to become. And it happened because of a perfume. The night itself looked ordinary, a corporate event in a hotel ballroom trying too hard to look elegant. Chandeliers reflecting off polished floors, round tables with white cloths and name cards. He went because not going would have raised questions. He wore the suit he always wore, the one that made him look present but not ambitious. He had perfected the art of being seen just enough to avoid being invisible, but not enough to be remembered. He sat where he was told, clapped when others clapped, and smiled at jokes that weren't funny. Nothing about that evening suggested his life was about to tilt off its axis. Then came the break. The room became a slow current of people drifting toward the bars and hallways. He stood with them, moving without intention, just following the flow. He wasn't searching for anything. He wasn't hoping for anything. And then the air shifted. It was so subtle, he almost missed it. A scent slipped into his awareness, cutting through the stale mix of hotel air and too many competing perfumes. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed with a quiet authority that made everything else feel less defined. Warm, deep, controlled. It smelled like a thought held back on purpose. He stopped walking. People flowed around him, annoyed at the obstacle he'd become. His entire focus collapsed into that single, invisible presence. He turned his head slowly, scanning the crowd. Just bodies, name tags, glasses of wine. Then his eyes landed on a figure near the center of the room. Not the loudest person there, not the one everyone was watching, but someone whose presence seemed to bend the space around them just slightly. They stood with relaxed posture, speaking with measured gestures, the kind of ease that only comes from people who know their own weight and do you and apologize for it. The scent moved with them. He watched as people leaned in closer, as conversations around them seemed to soften. The perfume wasn't doing the work, but it was marking the territory, drawing a line in the air that said, "Here is where something different begins." He told himself to walk away, to go back to his table and his safe, forgettable role. He didn't. Instead, he drifted closer, pulled by something older than logic. The faint, desperate hope that maybe, just once, something in his predictable life might surprise him. He ended up standing a few feet away, pretending to look at his phone. The scent was stronger here, wrapping around him like a question he didn't know how to answer. They turned slightly. Their path crossed his. "Excuse me," they said, their shoulder brushing past his. "No problem," he answered. They paused for half a second. Their eyes met his, just once, a brief acknowledgement that he existed. Then they kept moving. That should have been the end of it. A stranger, a scent, a glance. But the impression carved itself into his memory. For the first time in a long time, he felt fully awake, as if that brief moment had shaken off the fog he'd been moving through for years. The night ended the way these nights always end, politely and uneventfully, but he didn't feel the same. Days passed. He told himself it was nothing, just his mind latching onto a random detail because his life was so monotonous. But the memory wouldn't fade. He found himself thinking about it at strange times. Not about the person, exactly, but the feeling. The way the air had felt different in their proximity, the way he had felt different. He started asking himself uncomfortable questions. When was the last time he'd felt truly awake in his own life? When had he last made a choice that wasn't just the safest option? The answers shook him. Weeks turned into a month. Then, one evening, he saw them again, in a small, quiet cafe he'd walked into on impulse, tired of his usual routines. And there they were, sitting alone by the window. The scent reached him before his brain fully processed the sight. His heart slammed against his ribs. He froze in the doorway. Terrified and exhilarated, Tay looked up. Their eyes met his. This time, there was recognition. A small smile appeared. "You were at that event," they said. A statement, not a question. I was, he replied. You looked like you wanted to be anywhere else. I did, he admitted. I usually do. They gestured to the chair across from them. Then why do you keep going? He could have lied, given the professional answer. Instead, the truth slipped out, because I don't know what else to do. They studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the empty seat. He sat. They talked for hours about work that drained them, lives that felt like performances, and the gap between who they were supposed to be and who they actually were. The perfume wrapped around every pause, making the space between them feel separate from the rest of the world, like a pocket of honesty. Before they left, they handed him a card, just a name and a number. If you ever decide you're retired of going to places you ain't want to be, they said, call me. His old self would have let that card gather dust in a drawer. This time, he didn't. He called 2 days later. What followed wasn't a romance. It was something more important. A friendship built on the shared understanding that they were both tired of living on autopilot. They introduced him to people who were building things that mattered, projects that had risk, conversations that had weight. Slowly, his world expanded beyond the narrow lane he'd been driving in for years. He left his job, not for something easier, but for something harder that felt like his. He started saying no to invitations that drained him and yes to ones that scared him. He stopped apologizing for taking up space. His life didn't become perfect. It becamis, and all of it the risky choices. The slow reconstruction of his days into something he actually wanted to live traced back to one moment in a ballroom, to a perfume that had marked a stranger. Years later, he would try to explain it, how something invisible had rewritten his future. He knew the rational version. He'd been ready for change, and the perfume was just the trigger. But there was another version he felt was truer. The perfume hadn't created his destiny. It had marked the exact moment he chose to stop sleepwalking through his own life. One fragrance, 1 second, one breath. A destiny that, afterward, could never be called accidental again. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments and subscribe for more content that explores the small moments that change everything.